Imagine this. You've finally settled into your hard-earned VIP seat, ready to enjoy the experience you've been looking forward to for weeks. You've worked long nights, saved up, and made the decision to treat yourself because, frankly, you deserve it. But just as you adjust your seatbelt, a flight attendant approaches with an almost apologetic look on her face. Then comes the line, "We need you to switch seats for someone else." At first, you wonder if it's a mistake. That's exactly what Elisha thought. But as the situation unfolded, it became clear this wasn't about rules, policies, or a simple mix-up. It was something much deeper, something uglier. Why was she being targeted? Who made the request? And why did they think they could get away with it? More importantly, how did this moment of blatant discrimination turn into a situation where an entire team was fired? This isn't just a story. It's a lesson in standing up for what's right, demanding accountability, and making your voice heard. Let me introduce you to Elisha. She's not just anyone. Elisha is a self-made success story, a corporate executive who has worked tirelessly to build her career from the ground up. She knows her worth and isn't afraid to fight for it, no matter the obstacles. For Elisha, this trip wasn't just a vacation. It was a celebration, a moment to breathe, reflect, and enjoy the rewards of her hard work. Upgrading to a VIP seat wasn't about showing off or indulging in luxury. It was about rewarding herself for her dedication, long hours, and sacrifices. She wanted comfort, peace, and most importantly, what she had paid for. When Elisha arrived at the airport that morning, everything seemed perfect. Her sharp outfit and poised demeanor turned heads as she walked through the terminal. She breezed through security, checked into the VIP lounge, and allowed herself a moment to savor the anticipation of a well-earned trip. Everything felt right, that is, until she boarded the plane. Her seat was exactly as she had envisioned, spacious, comfortable, tucked away in the quiet VIP section. She stowed her carry-on, adjusted her seatbelt, and started mentally preparing for a relaxing journey. But then, out of nowhere, a flight attendant appeared beside her. Her smile was polite, but there was an edge to her tone. "Excuse me, ma'am," the attendant said. "We're going to need you to switch seats." At first, Elisha thought it must be a misunderstanding. "I'm sorry," she replied, calm but firm. She double-checked her ticket, holding it up as if to confirm her own memory. "This is my seat. Is there a problem?" The flight attendant hesitated for a moment before her smile faltered. "No issue," she said, her voice clipped. "It's just that we have another passenger who needs this seat." For a second, Elisha wondered if the request might be reasonable. Maybe the other passenger had a medical condition or some urgent need. But as she glanced up, she saw the truth. The passenger waiting nearby was neither elderly nor disabled. He was a white man in a business suit carrying an air of entitlement thick enough to fill the room. This wasn't about necessity. It was about privilege. Elisha's pulse quickened, but she stayed calm. "I'm sorry," she said again. "I paid for this seat. I'm not moving." The flight attendant's demeanor changed instantly. The polite tone vanished, replaced by frustration. "We're asking you to cooperate," she snapped. "It's just a seat." "It's not just a seat," Elisha responded firmly. "It's the seat I paid for. If there's a reason I need to move, I'd like to hear it." The tension in the cabin grew thick, and other passengers started noticing the exchange. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people looked sympathetic and nodded in Elisha's direction, while others seemed neutral, unwilling to take a side. Then there were a few who looked annoyed, not at the situation, but at Elisha herself, as though her refusal to comply was an inconvenience. For Elisha, this wasn't just about a seat. It was about standing up for what's right. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to be pushed aside like this. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for anyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. The murmurs grew louder, but Elisha remained steady. This wasn't her first encounter with injustice, and it likely wouldn't be her last. Her resolve only grew stronger. If she caved now, what kind of message would that send to herself, to the crew, or to the other passengers watching? What followed was a moment that would spark a storm of events, a series of actions that would shake the airline to its core. But before we dive into that, let's take a closer look at what really happened here. How did Elisha handle the situation? What steps did she take to ensure her voice was heard? And how did this seemingly small act of discrimination end up getting an entire corporate team held accountable? And how did this seemingly small act of discrimination end up getting an entire corporate team held accountable? Stick around because this story is about to take some unexpected twists. As the flight attendant stood firm in her demand, Elisha realized she was at a crossroads. She could either give in and give up her seat to avoid conflict, or she could stand her ground, knowing that doing so might spark a larger confrontation. For Elisha, the choice was clear. "I'm not moving," she said, her voice steady. "If there's a legitimate reason for this request, I'd like to hear it. Otherwise, I'm staying right here." The flight attendant's expression darkened. She hadn't expected resistance. "Ma'am," she began again, her tone sharper now. "This is a matter of convenience. The other passenger paid for their seat just like I did." Elisha interrupted, finishing the sentence for her. "Convenience doesn't justify asking someone to give up what they've rightfully purchased." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made others in the VIP section turn their heads. By now, the tension had drawn the attention of several passengers. A middle-aged woman across the aisle leaned forward, her face etched with concern. "She's right," the woman said quietly, addressing the flight attendant. "This doesn't seem fair." The murmurs started spreading like wildfire. Passengers closest to the scene exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement with Elisha, while others whispered among themselves, casting glances of irritation, not at the airline, but at Elisha. "I paid for my ticket too, and this is slowing us down," muttered a man from a few rows back, shaking his head. Elisha appreciated the support from the woman across the aisle, but it wasn't just about the support. It was about standing firm in the face of injustice, and what came next would change everything. The flight attendant, however, didn't seem deterred. She repeated, "We're asking for your cooperation," as if the repetition would make Elisha change her mind. "The other passenger has a very tight connection," she added, "and so do I." Elisha shot back, "I upgraded to this seat because I needed the extra space and comfort for my connecting flight. I'm sorry, but my needs aren't less important." At that moment, the other passenger, the white man in the business suit, decided to intervene. His voice was sharp, dripping with entitlement. "This is ridiculous," he said, glaring at Elisha. "It's just a seat. You're being unreasonable." Elisha turned to face him, her calm demeanor unwavering. "I paid for this seat, just like you paid for yours," she replied. "If it's just a seat, why don't you take the one assigned to you?" The man's face flushed, and he opened his mouth to retort, but stopped when another passenger, a younger man seated behind Elisha, spoke up. "She's got a point," the man said loudly enough for everyone in the section to hear. "If you want a VIP seat, pay for one like everyone else." The man in the suit shot a glare at the younger man, who raised his hands in mock surrender but smirked slightly. Elisha saw the tension ripple across the cabin as more passengers began to mutter among themselves, some agreeing with her, others clearly wishing the scene would end. The flight attendant, sensing she was losing control, stepped back and gestured toward the front of the plane. "I'll be right back," she said curtly, before walking away. For a moment, Elisha allowed herself to breathe. She could feel the eyes of other passengers on her, some sympathetic, others indifferent. A few sided with the man in the suit, their faces full of irritation and disapproval. Elisha caught snippets of their murmured conversations. "Why doesn't she just move?" one woman whispered to her seatmate. "It's not a big deal." Elisha clenched her hands in her lap. The urge to simply give in and end the discomfort was strong, but she resisted. She thought about all the times she had been asked, or expected, to shrink herself, to accept less than she deserved, just for the sake of convenience. Not today, she thought. Not this time. The woman across the aisle smiled and said, "That was bold. Good for you." Elisha nodded, but she didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired of always having to prove herself, to defend her right to occupy spaces she'd earned. But she also felt resolute. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about standing up for herself and refusing to be treated as less than. When the flight attendant returned, she wasn't alone. A middle-aged man, the supervisor, followed closely behind her. His forced smile did little to mask the irritation in his eyes as he approached Elisha. "Ma'am," he began, "we understand there's been some confusion. Let's see if we can resolve this amicably." "There's no confusion," Elisha replied evenly. "I paid for this seat, and I'm not moving." The supervisor's smile tightened, and his tone grew more measured, though still condescending. "I understand your perspective, but we're asking for your cooperation. The other passenger has certain priorities." "And his priorities don't trump mine," Elisha interrupted. "I've made it clear. I'm not moving." The supervisor's face hardened. "If you refuse to cooperate, we may have to involve security," he said. Elisha's heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. "Go ahead," she said calmly. "In fact, I'd like to speak with them myself. I want it on record that I'm being asked to give up a seat I paid for without any legitimate reason." The supervisor looked caught off guard. He glanced at the flight attendant, who shifted uncomfortably. "There's no need to escalate this further," the supervisor said, his tone now tinged with frustration. "We're simply trying to accommodate." "You're trying to accommodate him at my expense," Elisha said, gesturing toward the man in the suit. "If that's the airline's policy, I'd like it in writing. Otherwise, I'm staying right here." The murmurs in the cabin grew louder. A man 2 rows back spoke up, his voice irritated. "Why is this taking so long? Just let her keep her seat and move on." A voice, louder and sharper, cut through the air. "This is outrageous. This airline should be ashamed." The comment came from an elderly woman seated near the front of the VIP section. Her words drew applause from a few passengers, while others continued to murmur among themselves. The supervisor sighed heavily. "I'll need to consult with the captain," he said. "Please remain seated while we resolve this." As he walked away, Elisha exhaled. Her hands gripped the armrests of her seat. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her, but she refused to show any fear or uncertainty. She was determined to see this through, no matter the outcome. When the plane finally touched down, Elisha's resolve had not wavered, but her exhaustion was clear. She had won the battle on board, but she knew this wasn't over. The experience was burned into her memory, every word, every gesture replaying in vivid detail. It was time to take action, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been in her shoes. After disembarking, Elisha didn't hesitate. She found a quiet corner in the terminal, her suitcase beside her, and dialed the airline's corporate customer service number. The hold music was annoying, but it gave her a moment to collect her thoughts. She wasn't angry, she was measured, deliberate. This wasn't about venting frustration, it was about accountability. "Thank you for calling customer service. How may I assist you today?" The representative chirped, their voice detached and professional. "I need to escalate an incident that occurred on my flight," Elisha began. "It involves discriminatory behavior from your staff, and I need to speak with someone in a supervisory position." The representative paused, their upbeat tone faltering. "I'm sorry to hear that. Could you provide some details about the incident?" Elisha recounted the events clearly and concisely, emphasizing the facts. She left no room for ambiguity, detailing how she had been asked to vacate her paid VIP seat, the entitlement of the other passenger, and the threats of involving security when she stood her ground. "This isn't just poor service," she concluded. "It's discrimination." The representative's responses became increasingly generic. "I understand your frustration. I'll file a report and ensure this is escalated." "That's not enough," Elisha interjected firmly. "I want a direct response from your corporate office, and let me make this clear. If I don't hear back, I won't hesitate to take this public." The representative, likely sensing the seriousness of the situation, promised the report would be sent to higher-ups immediately. But Elisha wasn't one to leave things to chance. As soon as she ended the call, she opened her phone and began drafting a post for her social media accounts. Elisha knew the power of storytelling, especially in an age where a single viral post could bring down corporations. That evening, she composed a detailed account of her experience. She included every relevant detail: the flight number, the staff's behavior, the other passengers' entitlement. She kept the tone factual but unapologetically firm, ending with a powerful statement. This is the reality for Black travelers, even in spaces we've paid to occupy. Enough is enough. Within hours, her post began gaining traction. Comments flooded in, some from people who had witnessed similar incidents, others expressing outrage on her behalf. Stories of discrimination from other travelers poured in. A man denied boarding because he looked suspicious. A family separated from their seats due to an error that somehow didn't affect anyone else. The floodgates had opened. By morning, Elisha's story had been shared thousands of times. Hashtags like #FlyingWildBlack and #TravelingWildBlack began trending across platforms. Influencers and advocacy groups picked up the message, amplifying it further. Elisha's inbox overflowed with messages of support, media inquiries, and most notably, screenshots of others vowing to boycott the airline until justice was served. Social media exploded with fury toward the airline's official accounts. Posts demanding accountability were accompanied by screenshots of Elisha's viral story. One particularly scathing comment read, "So you're telling me a Black woman can't even sit in a seat she paid for without being harassed? Do better." Memes began circulating with captions like, "Airline policy, VIP or very intimidating passenger if you're Black and upgrade." Influencers with millions of followers joined the conversation, tagging the airline and demanding change. Videos dissecting the incident garnered millions of views, further amplifying the pressure. Within hours, media outlets picked up the story. Headlines ranged from "Airline faces racism allegations after VIP seat incident" to "Black traveler takes a stand against discrimination." Elisha was inundated with interview requests but chose her words carefully. She wasn't seeking revenge, she was seeking change. "This isn't about me," she told one reporter. "It's about a systemic issue. This is the kind of behavior people like me face every day in countless industries. I'm just not willing to accept it anymore." Elisha's story quickly gained widespread attention after an incident on a flight where she was asked to vacate her VIP seat to accommodate a white passenger with a tight connection. She refused, citing that she paid for the seat and deserved equal treatment. When a flight attendant and a supervisor tried to pressure her, Elisha stood firm, even threatening to involve security. The situation escalated, with passengers on board voicing support for Elisha, while others sided with the man in the suit. After the flight, Elisha called customer service, demanding accountability for what she considered discriminatory behavior. She shared her experience on social media, and the story went viral. Hashtags like #FlyingWildBlack trended, and public outcry against the airline grew. Advocacy groups, influencers, and regular passengers rallied for change, pressuring the airline to act. The airline's initial response was defensive and failed to apologize properly, causing more outrage. A follow-up statement promised reviews and sensitivity training, but the public demanded more, firing the staff involved and policy reforms. Elisha wasn't satisfied with vague promises and pushed for real change. Under public pressure, the airline released the results of its internal investigation, admitting staff misconduct and systemic failures. The flight attendant and supervisor were fired, and the airline announced mandatory bias training and the creation of an independent oversight board. The incident sparked a broader movement across the airline industry, with other companies implementing similar reforms. Congress held hearings, and Elisha was invited to testify about the need for systemic change, not just in airlines, but across all industries. Months later, Elisha spoke at a national leadership conference, emphasizing that while the past couldn't be changed, the future could. "It takes courage to stand up and say, 'This isn't right,'" she said. Her story had become more than an individual battle. It was a movement for equality, systemic reform, and dignity in all spaces. For Elisha, the resolution was never about personal vindication. It was about paving the way for others facing similar injustices. In the months following the incident, the airline made visible efforts to rebuild its reputation, launching employee training programs focused on bias awareness, conflict resolution, and empathy. The airline also created an independent oversight board to reopen previously dismissed cases of discrimination. Additionally, they launched a scholarship program for aspiring aviation professionals from underrepresented communities. However, Alicia remained cautiously optimistic, noting that real change is about consistent action, not just initial steps. While the airline made improvements, the emotional toll of her journey stayed with her. Late at night, she reflected, saying, "If my experience can spare even one person from going through the same thing, then it's worth it." Alicia expanded her advocacy, partnering with civil rights organizations to launch a national campaign encouraging people to document and report discrimination. She also worked on a book, Seating Arrangements: How to Fight for the Space You Deserve, which became a bestseller. Alicia's story went beyond her individual experience, inspiring corporations across sectors to reevaluate their policies. It also led to advocacy for national standards to prevent discrimination in all customer-facing industries. The government took notice, too. Lawmakers proposed Alicia's Law, which mandated reporting of bias-related incidents. Alicia testified at a Senate hearing, emphasizing that dignity and respect should be rights, not privileges. Her journey wasn't about accolades. It was about permanent systemic change. The numbers of incidents reported, workshops held, and policy changes enacted were staggering, but Alicia found the real victory in the quiet moments. Messages from strangers saying, "Because of you, I found my voice." Alicia's story became a movement. She reminded everyone that change starts with individuals who refuse to accept the status quo. "Courage is contagious," she often said, showing that every action counts toward creating a world where fairness and respect are universal. Through her campaign, Your Voice, Your Power, Alicia empowered people to stand up for themselves and push for equality.